And that, to me, is the perfect opportunity, because it's actually honouring the fact that you've got to bring together these traditionally siloed 8 learning areas and find a way of connecting them. And the way that we connect them is through these approaches to learning. Not you're bringing a group of people together, you're looking at different content and bringing it into a real life environment where you can wrestle with each other, you can have robust conversations, you can encourage young people to be reflective.
This is the most nervous I've ever seen Brad.
I know,
but you know what? Actually,
he's a master at this
I
stuff.
would have been better off not to do any of this.
No, but you know what it is? It's the most silent I've ever seen Brad.
Deep in thought.
And I had big visions over the weekend of reading through all this. Of course, I left it on my desk, so, you know, school
Just
being
be
school.
prepared. A lot of it you're not going to be able to get through in 1 hour. That's
Yeah.
just unfortunately what happens. People come in with loads of notes and they go, oh, I meant to talk about 3/4 of this that didn't get a chance to. So just...
I don't think that's going to happen. I reckon I'll end up reading it.
Okay, well, I'm going to read this one too, because it's I've been stuffing up the last few intros, so I'm just
Find that very hard to believe.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome to our enthusiastic head of middle school, Mr. Brad Gill. He's an experienced educator who's travelled all around the world teaching in Japan, the US, as well as UAE. And probably most importantly, you were recently head of primary school at the school I went to, St. Mark's in Hillarys.
There you go. I didn't realise that, Steve.
Yeah,
Ah.
So yeah, that's where I grew up. Well, one of the places I grew up. How's it all going? How's the middle school going? You've been here a couple of years?
Yeah, it is. It's sort of that part where I think you sort of get past the rose-coloured glasses and you sort of feel like people are waiting for you to do something. So I'm thinking we're exactly at that point, Steve. No point just wandering around like the mayor, sort of giving it the royal wave, and a bit of productivity, I hope, is in the immediate future.
Yeah, good. Well, one reason why we wanted to get you on, and we may get to other topics, but the biggest one, I think, is why is middle school a really critical area for developing soft skills, or what we call approaches to learning. And we want to kind of initially start, I guess, by identifying what ATLs, or approaches to learnings, are, or what soft skills or non-technical skills, all these terms, what are they?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've got lots of thoughts which do tend to happen in my head. It's like the whole, oh, look, a bird, off I go. I'll forget what they are, so you might have to bring me back. But I think the lure of Scotch, for me, educationally, professionally, was multifaceted, but it's fair to say that one of those factors was the precision around middle school, that sort of tailored intentionality of educating people in that sort of critical age, 11 to 13, 14 years of age. They're moving from being fairly dependent primary school learners to, we hope, somewhat independent. Physically they're developing and evolving as well at the same time. I think largely primary school models, for a host of, I'm sure, very appropriate reasons, are very sort of externally motivated, and so we're looking, potentially at helping to develop a learner with lots of intrinsic drive, and I think we've got an opportunity in that middle school piece. To be very honest, and I've said this repeatedly, there were many things that were appealing about Scotch, but the IB was certainly one of them. If it wasn't number 1 or 2, it was certainly in the top 5. And central to the IB is this notion of approaches to learning, and I think by language it's probably the most powerful. You've referenced already, their soft skills, their general capabilities, their 21st century skills, all of those sorts of things. So it's nice to have a frame where it's sort of front and centre. Approaches to learning, critically important, and I think. For our boys, oftentimes it's the first time they've really been drawn into that, and that's confronting and challenging and not easy by any stretch. And I wonder if one of the reasons that we haven't focused on these sorts of competencies up until this point is they're really quite challenging. They're challenging to deliver, really hard to provide feedback around.
And not everyone knows what they are either.
Right.
So, this is, so to give a nice clear definition of what they actually are, they're things that aren't technical. So it's not learning how to use a particular program. It's not writing skills, it's not mathematics skills, but it's things like social skills, communication skills, problem solving, resilience, motivation, all those other aspects of things that make you a good learner.
Oh, I would agree. I think I wrote down in a whole series of notes, but I think the perhaps the only thing I will read, if I can find it, is the definition that the IB have sort of given around these approaches to learning, and I think it sort of sums it up. Somewhere in here I will find it, Steve. It sort of goes, approaches to learning, or the ATLs, are skills designed to enable students in the IB, and in our case the middle years program, actually to learn how they learn. And I think that's critically important. I think, education as a construct, certainly since sort of the industrial sort of revolution, has been a tool of efficiencies and scales of economies. Somebody's made a decision that we'll keep these kids in the same group at the same time because of their age largely, and will define that they all need this today. And that's that content knowledge, in any of the hierarchies that those of us that have studied education, it's pretty low level. Not a lot of time sort of aspiring up to the higher order thinking skills. And for me, that's where the ATL sit and why it's a real sort of grind for adolescent boys. They're used to going, tell me what I need to do, and I'll tick that box at the lowest common denominator, I might add. We set these benchmarks, we look at rubrics, and the boys say, oh, that's all I have to do. No, that's the minimum of what you have to do, but we can aspire up here. And I think that's the real challenge. Adolescent boys, they're looking for least path of resistance, and we're trying to get them, probably for the first time, to really reflect on their learning, develop this notion of metacognition, which is a term that I'm sure many of them wouldn't have appreciated. And thankfully we've got 3 years to try and work on that. And to get all the way back to your question, what was exciting about the Scotch piece is saying, we've got 3 years that we can really look to hone in on the development of these skills. One of my worries, and I think you touched on it as well, these 8 learning areas that exist in the Australian national curriculum tend to be very siloed. We don't see that in any other part of our life. Everything, the interconnectedness of things. And so I worry a little bit about that for our students in year 11 and year 12, but when it starts to permeate down and find its space in year 7 and year 8, and to be honest, that's the high school experience for the vast majority of students in Australia. For us, my role is to push back a little bit, and I am absolutely convinced that pushing down those 8 siloed learning areas into a middle school experience is actually counterintuitive and detrimental to what we're trying to do.
So would you say it's more critical to be teaching soft skills than the core areas, or is it a combination of both in middle school?
Oh, I think for me, the teacher as the Pied Piper. I would say, answer your question specifically, yes, I think it is more important that we should be teaching those skills. We have a mandated requirement to the curriculum, so that can be the construct of what we're trying to do. But as the artist in our science of education, that's the push-pull of it, to find those opportunities. For the student, it's going to be about the product. That tends to be what it is. So that can be the line that we follow, but the contextualisation is really on the educator to say, how do I embed into this process this spiralling development of really core competencies, especially now when you walk around and, I was educated, I went to school in the 70s and the 80s. Most of my education, I think, happened outside of that, to be perfectly honest. And I suppose, thankfully, I think most people that get into education tend to be empathetic by nature. But that's just had me focus largely on relationship, whether that's existing in my personal world, my choice of friends and people I choose to be with, but even professionally, it's that notion of how do we communicate, how are we mindful of individual difference and life experience and cultural background and the richness of that really adding to any of my relationships. And I think it's the same and true in a learning environment. I teach year 8 support mathematics, so that's about as dry as you can sort of think. If you looked at it through a very traditional model of going, right, my responsibility is to impart core competencies of year 8 mathematics. We've recently finished linear equations. I'm not sure how many adults would actually think on a day-to-day basis they use linear equations, and I had the responsibility of getting 12 year 8 students to try and make meaning with that. It was made easier by putting it into a contextualised real life experience, and it was made, I think, more available to the students because of the relationship. They had a trust in me that we're going to make this something that's meaningful to them, and they can ask really important questions, and if they're not seeing a justification, learning how to do that respectfully and appropriately warrants the same degree of response from me. So, those soft skills that you talk about are vital in all of that. That communication, the collaboration exists all the time. We just haven't overtly focused on them. And to get back to what you're saying, that's why they're more important than the content piece, I would think.
Yeah. Sorry, you had a question, Sam?
So, Brad, we've got this language here at Scotch, there's approaches to learning, and we've got our sort of particular categories in that, self-regulation, communication, all those things. Like, how, in your view, a utopian view of a program that could really capture all of these skills and develop them in the boys. What kind of things are exciting you on the horizon for the middle school? Things you want to do, things you have done that really target those soft skills?
I like the idea of, I suppose, what we're required to do, part of our program, and looking for these sort of permission points. Right. So these IDUs, these interdisciplinary units of inquiry, are a central part. Like, we're required as part of our upcoming re-licensing program, if you like. And that, to me, is the perfect opportunity, because it's actually honouring the fact that you've got to bring together these traditionally siloed 8 learning areas and find a way of connecting them. And the way that we connect them is through these approaches to learning. Like, you're bringing a group of people together, you're looking at different content and bringing it into a real-life environment where you can wrestle with each other, you can have robust conversations, you can encourage young people to be reflective and not feel like they have to respond immediately, which is largely what the system is asking us to do. I'm going to present you with some information, you're going to retain it for a period of time that allows you to give it back to me next week, and I'll mark it and I'll give it back to you. Then you'll sort of push it off to the side and hopefully bring it up again when it cycles around in a year or two, where these soft skills are the ongoing every minute of every day that allow people to return to the project, the day after or 2 days after, knowing that in the time that they left you, that their mind was still engaged. They were wrestling with some concepts, or maybe somebody presented a view that they hadn't considered before. And it doesn't mean that it has to sit comfortably on their shoulders, but they go away and they go, I'm just not so sure about that, but I wasn't informed enough. And so now that you're not telling them what the content is, they're being driven to go away and do some research independently, apply it to the situation, and develop that robust conversation. It grows their commitment to the traditional learning sense because it's now meaningful to them. It serves a purpose. It's helping them replicate I think what are much more appropriate professional relationships in the workplace. Is what you would want to do. You don't have to know it instantly.
It is definitely, and it has been very much identified that those are the areas, these soft skills that are somewhat deficient in new graduates coming into workforce. I think you might say the same thing as well, Sam, as about when we see guys that aren't performing particularly well in high school, it's mostly because of their soft skills. It's not because of their inability to understand content. It's their soft skills. So how do you think? There's 3 factors to it, I guess. There's the student, the teacher, and the parent. But if we can focus on the student initially, how do they perceive ATLs in the middle school? Do they think they're important? And how are they performing with them?
I think they're the easiest sort of subset of those 3 components.
Yeah, the other ones might be tricky.
Yeah, I think they really are. And that's not because they overtly know it. They're just more adaptable. They're younger. They haven't had too much of their creativity in their innovation totally knocked out of them just yet. Yeah. But they're learning and they're understanding, a little Pavlovian, aren't they? They know, just tell me what I need and I'll respond to that. So we're just noticing that. You'll have astute, really academically strong boys almost fight against their want to be creative and innovative because they know there's a short track here. And if you just tell me what I need to know, I'll make sure I find time to apply. They won't use these terms, their own approaches to learning. Like they'll go and do the research. They'll make sure they're communicative with you, the person, finding out what it is. They'll use their time well and they'll prepare. And they will absolutely be able to satisfy the assessment task, which fairly traditionally is a regurgitation of what they've been given over the last couple of weeks. But my argument is, imagine if you allowed them the same degree of independence and research and collaboration and communication, and you presented them more with a provocation than a series of sort of very linear, black, white, yes, no, factual responses. That's a given in this climate. You no longer have to retain that. Thankfully, I wouldn't have survived anywhere near as long as I have in education if you needed to be the sage on the stage. Growing up and as an early educator, I think I looked at role models and thought, geez, that's what you have to be. And perhaps that's why I became a primary educator, because there's no way I'm going to be able to remember, the Treaty of Versailles and what was important to modern history. But I stand a fighting chance of being able to teach kids their times tables. But over time, what I learnt was that not only was not who I could be. It's not who I wanted to be. You know, my role and what I enjoy about working with adolescent boys in our community is that aha light bulb moment, that continual desire to just reframe their question and give it back to them and get to that point where it's now making connections, it's now meaningful, they're pushing through the frustration and the fact that you aren't going to tell them what the answer is. That part has been exciting to me. But the answer to the bit about what do the boys know, very little, Steve, I would say, about ATLs. You and I have shared an experience that for me was hugely powerful.
Do you want to work through that? Because to tell everyone what we did try to do, we're trying to identify strengths and weaknesses in ATLs in particular areas, and if we identify an area that requires need, then try to do something about it. And I think, you know, we all love design thinking model, and you know, we don't know whether this would actually work or not, but it's probably worth trying, and we definitely got some interesting things out of it. So we've got a novice through to a leader. So a novice being someone who's not performing particularly well in a particular ATL, and doesn't really change. A learner can kind of learn and develop a bit more. A practitioner is someone who does it, and a leader is someone who does it well and also tries to lead others, right? So they're the four categories. If we identified them as one, what did we do?
Yeah, so look, absolutely. Our boys and our staff appreciate that alongside their criterion referenced assessment, and one of those will largely be a content sort of area, and one might be application, there'll be a reflection. Separate to that is this notion of providing feedback to students with regards to these ATLs. So the one that Steve and I worked through, and which was so powerful to me, was sort of the self-management as a ATL of focus in a design task. And Steve had obviously gone away and spent some time sort of really reflecting on why some of the students weren't as productive or successful in that space. Everything was there they could possibly need. That's without me going into the area that space for our boys is unbelievably challenging. And I used to be really confused about that, because I'm going, what would be better than going into a space and saying to a student, here's a problem, go and solve it. And it was confronting that they are so conditioned to the current educational cycle, they didn't know what to do with that degree of freedom. They were unable to engage. And even though that there was scaffolding and, the design thinking model was there, and we want to get you brainstorming and ideating and then generating prototypes and then testing and failing and testing again. And that process was so foreign to them, like it's really lost because they're conditioned to a different paradigm. But with the specific focus around this self-management, Steve, and with my full support, and I thought, we'll see how this goes. We sort of looked at two classes, and I think, Steve, about 18 boys that we identified.
3 classes across them.
Then we thought, well, we're just going to go all in, and so we got the classes together. So this is now all of the boys, 50 I would imagine across the 3 classes, and we sort of shared with them our responsibility to providing authentic feedback, because feedback's the bit that allows you to adjust your learning and work in areas that you've got challenge. And so we did I'm taking a lot of credit for what Steve largely delivered, a really nice setup of what we were trying to do. But the trusting part for me was, and we identified publicly 18 boys that we thought were falling a little bit short. We didn't want to sort of suggest we knew why, but we took them off to the side, and the rest of the class continued. So number one, the boys were resilient enough to handle that. No one capitulated in front of their peers because they'd been called out. I think they genuinely felt a connection with us and a want for us to engage in a conversation about how we could support them. So they came along. And
it's also important how we present. This isn't something that's wrong with you. It's just an area that we need to develop further, right?
Yeah,
and we
absolutely.
want to help you with that. It's good to put it in that perspective.
Right, and we went around, and Steve generated the conversation, and I thought this is going to need a little bit of scaffolding from us, but largely it didn't. The boys were honest enough in front of their peers, looking their teacher in the eye, to absolutely acknowledge the behaviours and lack of productivity and distractibility and misfocus and all of the things that we were seeing. They could absolutely identify and honour and own, and there was no debate about that. So now the real challenge was the why. And that was really challenging for the boys, for them to be able to be equally concise and articulate about why were they behaving in those ways. That was the real challenging point. And now we're getting into the crux of it, the real, what I think is powerful in their development. And again, we came back to the language and trying to pull it apart and suggest what was obviously shared view, their behaviours, but the why. And then we actually were bold enough to sort of say, let's revisit the ATLs. We know we're talking specifically about self-management, and we asked, so boys, you're year 8. This is, for many of you, your third year of the MYP, and for a number of others, you've come through the college, through the junior school, and so we are housed in a IB exclusive framework up until that stage. PYP and MYP and ATLs are about the place. Given there's a few boys that do start in year 7, but we asked them, there's 5 ATLs. Can you name them for us? And, they were shouting out learning intentions and general capabilities and all sorts of educational jargon, but were unable to actually give us the nomenclature for this group of skills.
Do you know, were they new year 8s or have they been for...
So sure. Year 8s, we across the 180 boys in the cohort, maybe have had 5 or 6 that joined us this year. So the vast majority, Steve, would have at least been in the second year of their MYP experience. So we're doing this. Staff are connecting them into their taught learning curriculums. They're providing feedback, but we're not honouring them, or otherwise the boys would have been a little bit more comfortable in their knowledge.
Brad, do you think that a big part of this is having a language, like a vocabulary, to talk about their own capacities in these soft skills too, right? Like, to be metacognitive of these things, you have to sort of have a language in your head of ways of distinguishing whether you're struggling a bit or you're not. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And just as you're saying that, Sam, I'm thinking, so Steve's already referenced the fact, we've got novice and, practitioner, and we go all the way through to leader, where, again, our preconditioning is all about a grading system, right? That's usually numeric. So it doesn't have that. So soft skills by nature and by assessment, I would as well. And I think boys have worked out, is that going to affect my grade? Mm-hmm. And regrettably, the system is having them go, well, and I will say, we're very fortunate for the quality of student that we have, having worked at lots of schools in lots of parts of the world, so that they'll honour that process. But I don't want them just to honour it. I want them to take it as a meaningful learning experience. So they'll tick it off. They'll reflect on it. They'll do their thing, but they're not taking it as seriously as I would want them to, but it's because the system isn't taking it as seriously as I would like it to, I think.
It's interesting because we took a component of those students out and they were novices really in that particular area. It's a fair assumption to say that maybe it's just the novices who don't understand the definitions. So it's something that, do you think that might be the case?
Yeah, it's a good point, to be honest. Yeah, I wonder, as I get on my soapbox, Steve, it's probably fair to say that you are right, 75% or whatever it was of the students that were successful in our very, sort of loose criteria of what success looked like. Yeah. But they were the ones, and in that learning environment, the ones that do have self-motivation, that collaborate well, that research, that manage, are successful. So
and it's beneficial to have, when those boys are removed, it's kind of beneficial for the other boys to just be able to perform well, and they realise that, this is important. So
and I think you were right. I think we were able to talk to the subset of boys that we had away, and they were very able to say, yeah, perhaps my choices in that space are limiting my peers' ability to be successful. So the conversation was a powerful one. It was really informative to me, and I think probably led us a little bit to why we're sitting down today, Steve, to go, right, okay, our collective boss ringing in my ears when I stepped into the job was, Scotch College has a middle school. Not everybody has one. If we're going to have one, it would want to be our point of difference. And so, I'm pretty passionate in this space, and I would like that to be what increasingly we become aware of.
Yeah. Now, you took a group of novice students for that self-regulation ATL. As you say, what if you took a group of 15 leaders, put them in a room together, and got them to articulate collectively what was going?
It'd be worthy
what was
of a
going
study,
really well.
Yeah, we could do an action research on it or something like that.
Yeah. Well, look, actually, you're fair to both of you. Have made me. I'm using it. I don't know, educational propaganda or whatever. I'm using it to frame my vision, if you like, but I think you're right to do it justice in our community, and in fact, I have no doubt that there would be a good number of young men that we could get into a room and ask them similar questions and do an exceptional job. And again, not because they've been overtly taught what they are, they just have a general growing appreciation for the skills that are making them successful as a student at the college.
So just coming back to, you talked about these environments where you want boys to solve problems in groups, and I'm assuming what you're talking about there is a bit more of a swing towards a project-based learning environment as a pedagogy. Is that as a sort of environment in which a lot of these skills can be really worked out? Is that kind of what you were alluding to before, and providing more opportunity for that style of learning in the middle school?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely, Sam, without a doubt. And I think, you know, the finality of secondary education is not lost on any of us. You know, it is absolutely what we're about, and providing young people with as many options as they can possibly consider at the completion of Year 12 is what we all want. And there are systems in place. We have the diploma, obviously the ATAR. They're easy to sort of rationalise because they're marks based, and you can look at that and assess data really quite easily. My worry about that system is if we take what we're required to deliver in Year 11 and Year 12 and bring the same pedagogy all the way down, I do have a worry about, and I don't think it's a real educational term, but sort of academic fatigue. You know, if you're doing the same thing for an extended period of time, it becomes a little like lost on you. The motivation to sustain that could be compromised, I would think. So this middle school part is an opportunity to embed the ATLs, to remind young people of the richness and diversity of learning. It's absolutely about authentic application and real-world opportunity and interdisciplinary work, where we really encourage a love of learning so that they are aware stepping into Year 9, right, I've had that experience. To live that post-secondary, I now do need to focus on some subject specificity and really hunker on down. I've got now the self-motivation, I've got the research skills, I collaborate well, and by collaboration, it doesn't mean that you have to work collectively all the time, but that you have a relationship with people that can help your learning journey. So that communication and collaboration would be with exceptionally well-qualified secondary educators who are just looking for that authentic relationship as well. We're all teachers, and obviously we work because we need to provide for our families, and we can go off on a tangent about wages and salaries, but ultimately the joy of education is establishing a relationship with a young person where they see value and a contribution from you, and you get to see an appreciation of that value and your mastery in a given area, and they are accessing that and they're applying it, and you get to sit back and watch the journey of this person, right? That's the beauty of education when it's working well. But I do absolutely think we've got an opportunity in middle school to provide rich learning outside of the classroom, potentially off campus, and we've got real license in that space. You know, for us geographically, we're right on a train line. I don't know, 75% of our boys get themselves independently to school. We don't need the permission of our parents. They're going to trust that we make really good decisions, and that we make learning meaningful and engaging. And so that for me is what I'm hoping we can work on in the short to mid-term.
So I remember when we interviewed Dr. O'Connell, I'm not sure how long ago that was, but that was in the midst of COVID, and he had this idea of collapsing the traditional timetable in periods 5 and 6 potentially, because it was all a bit uncertain what was going to happen on a school day, and only having 4 subjects taught across 1, 2, 3 and 4, and then the afternoon after lunch was purely a project-based environment, interdisciplinary. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we implement something like that tomorrow. I know, I'm sure that would make you happy, but there's all sorts of other timetabling concerns. But something akin to that, or breaking up the day.
Now, right? IDU something.
Yeah, so I'm sort of leaning on this formalised requirement of the IB. So we'll use the interdisciplinary unit, and we're required to do that. But it's really, for me, I think, an opportunity, despite me saying it repeatedly to our staff, there's more freedom and flexibility than what you are perhaps believing. You know, parents don't run into my office and ask me to provide evidence of us, hitting every attribute in every learning area, in every strand. They just trust as teachers that's what we're going to do. But they will come in and have a meeting with me if the learning experience isn't a rich, engaging one that's motivating their son or developing good relationships. Because as an independent school, obviously we're a bespoke option of choice, and so when we look about what are our points of difference, it's not going to be the Australian national curriculum, because that's what we're mandated to do, but it's how we might do that I think we've got some opportunity, and I'd much rather go, deep diving into some of the areas that we as informed progressive educators think are really important, and they can be reflective of where we call home, what's happening in the global environment, a response to societal needs, and find some sort of provocation or motivation from the real world, and then as the master of your practice, insert the requirements of the Australian national curriculum. And I think, I genuinely hope that our curriculum leaders are mindful of this opportunity, and so we'll start with that.
It's a good step.
IDUs.
It's a good first step, and all the issues are normally based around timetabling. We can't do a multidisciplinary unit because the timetables don't match them. But everything's collapsed. It's all going to happen. It's a good first step.
We've got another couple of options too, because what we've done recently, with the help of really committed collaborative communicators within our teaching field. The outdoor education team have been exceptional, because we'll run these really important programs, and we'll have students off campus really immersed in 24/7 learning experiences, and we all know the benefits of that, and the challenges, and how much young people find out about themselves. So that part's already been happening, but we've done it over extended period of time, taking away 1 or 2 classes, and we've got 7 in year 7 classes, so that plays out over a number of weeks, and then that, I'm hesitant to say compromises, but gives some challenge into what maths and science and English and social studies might happen at school when a quarter of your cohort are away. But with their help and some really committed sort of program and planning, we're going to bring that back to 2-week period. So half of our cohort will go off for their outdoor ed experience, leaving the other half of the cohort at school. And mine will collapse the timetable for 2 weeks, and we'll let students have an away from campus experience, and we'll create other experiences at the college, which I hope are authentic and real world and entrepreneurial, but at least rich experiences, and who knows what we might be able to do. No one's come forward and said to me, let's let the boys have a bit of a later start. We know they're adolescents and a sleep-in's probably a good idea, and we'll start at 10 o'clock, but we want the day to go through to 5, because one of the organisations we're working with could do with support in the after-school hours with a reading program at a school district with low literacy, or there's real opportunity, but I think we've got to recondition ourselves around, I'm easily distracted, number one, but also too, this notion of think outside the box. Well, let's even forget there was a box. At least while we're planning, let's not put the hurdles in front of ourselves until they actually present. Our families they're going to see this as an unbelievable opportunity. Our boys are going to absolutely see it the same. What do you mean? We get to go off campus and we're going to do all these rich things, and I think there's real chance here, and that interdisciplinary nature.
Yeah, well, that's the mentality of a creative person, is to not worry so much about all the issues that are going to be faced when you are brainstorming these kind of things. Let's just take a step forward and see what happens. And if it works, great, let's move on from there. And if not, who knows?
And I also think in the past there's been a little bit of suspicion around these interdisciplinary units, because they need to be done really well. And we're lucky here, we've got amazing teachers that can put, because there's a bit of sophistication that needs to go into a really successful interdisciplinary unit, so it doesn't just become a bit tokenistic. So I just think, I think that in the past, from my experience, I don't know about your experience at the various schools you've taught at, it can be done very well and done very badly as well.
And let's talk about the teachers too, because do you have to be multidisciplinary as a teacher? And should you be? And is that a fear of some teachers? Is that why it's hard for some schools to do these units?
Yeah, look, I think, Sam, to get to your point too, this we hear the term student-centered bandied around fairly regularly. And my worry about that actually is that we become so focused on the student that we lose the objectivity around what we're formally required to be teaching. It's not our job always to make them feel like it's all about them. And so it sort of gets to the point. And then the subject specificity versus somebody that has a bit more of a broad, I think all of those things need to be considered, which gets back to good collaboration, exceptional planning, clarity around what our own learning objectives are, and so we've got a rule of engagement. So we don't end up with a nice week-long program off campus, but there's not really a lot of guts to it, right? There's not a lot of growth. There's not a lot of clear objectivity around the maths tasks or the English tasks, or what it might be a focus in with your individuals in society or whatever it might be.
But the beauty of doing that stuff, I think, as teachers, is it's forcing the teachers to work on their own ATLs, isn't it? I mean, you would think our teachers here need to embody the skills that we're trying to impart to the kids and be in positions where they're having to demonstrate those skills, problem solving with someone who's perhaps not in your same discipline and that kind of thing. So
it'd be useful to throw a bit of vulnerability in as well and admit that yes, I'm not perfect at all of my ATLs as a teacher, but we're still trying to develop that with you. So how are teachers going with this? This is the other pillar of the three pillars. I wanted to maybe
nice segue.
Should we get to parents?
Beautiful.
No, I think parents are an important one. But
they are. I think the teacher one is the most critical. Obviously boys are, pretty adaptable, really. They are, and they come ready for respectful engagement on the whole. And again, having worked at lots of schools, I think very fortunate with our families and our student body, and they respond, good, bad or indifferent, to how engaged they are. But I would think our teachers obviously are critical, and like we've referenced repeatedly, we're very fortunate with the quality of colleague we have here. But I think some of it's around the clarity and whether on occasion we've got conflicting priorities with regards to
content versus
Well,
I struggle with that, to make it more comfortable for you to kind of criticize teachers in general. But I was I'm teaching STEM, and this was the rhetoric I was getting to do all these soft skills, and initially I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm a content expert. I'm going to teach them all about engineering and mechanics and all this kind of stuff, and those are on the periphery for me, and it's definitely come around the total other way. But it's taken me a few years to get to that point. So I imagine it's probably similar for most people.
Oh, and look, I'll say the same, Steve. I've referenced already, I'm teaching Year 8 maths at the moment, and on reflection only a few days ago, I looked back at the last 3 weeks in my class, and largely what am I doing? I've got the end in mind, no problem, but I'm driving, curriculum at these boys. I think my intent's admirable, but it's compromised a commitment to what you've highlighted. I'm so driven around making sure they've got the most opportunity to, sort of learn these skills, because I know they're the ones that are going to be in the assessment. And then I suppose out of that conversation, my lesson on Friday with the boys took a very different sort of point, and yep, there were some activities around ratios, but we had some application and some games and some real life piece, but we really just engaged in a conversation. It was more about me working out how do they feel about where they sat as a learner of ratios in mathematics. And I suppose my takeaway, thankfully, when I regained my senses, was that there is good trust in there, and we've had to work really hard about that for people to show. And I think the word that you used, I would say, is one of the most powerful words in the development of adolescent males, which is vulnerability. And our societal norm of masking that, any behaviour that ends up in my office for all the wrong reasons, I could almost comfortably say is as a result of masking of a vulnerability. Boys that are athletically inclined or physically of good stature, but struggle in the classroom. Now, these are stereotypes, I understand, but you can imagine I'm going to overplay that to mask the fact that I really am challenged in a traditional English learning environment. The reverse is true for a boy that has exceptional ability cognitively. Will oftentimes mask that because it's not celebrated within his peer group, especially at a time where he's stepping away, he's stiff-arming mum and dad a little bit, he wants to find his tribe, identity is important, belonging is important, and let's not forget we're fighting against this digital age, and there are so many good things that come from that. But in the hands of the ill-informed and lack of experience, it can do some fairly damaging things. So our young people are contemplating a lot on top of genuinely trying to do their level best to be successfully seen academically. There's a lot on for them.
And do you think we've been spending maybe too much time on asking kids what they think? You know, we obviously we have student-centered and constructivist and all these pedagogies that underpin what we do, but we don't tend to ask them how they're feeling as often, do we? And which is, I guess, to that vulnerability point. Give them opportunities to tell you how they feel, rather than, you know, I guess that emphasis on content, as you say, really it focuses on what they think. It doesn't so much focus on how their emotional IQ, I guess.
Yeah, I think you've really touched on a point, Sam, that I suppose I was going to get to, and we'll circle around, I'm sure, when we got to the parents. But sometimes it's about, you know, clarity of definition and what we need about it. And I think you've just hit on it, you know, whether it's think or feel, you'd say, they're not. They're very different, and depends what you're trying to get out of it about what you think or what you feel. And I would say it's the feel part of it, and having young boys, men in our case, work out that strong, successful men are vulnerable because they have a level of self-awareness, and they know that that's who I am. And, you know, we harp on about, thankfully, we're all uniquely different, and that's hard for a 11, 12, 13-year-old that doesn't see too many of their like-minded people, and then we don't see them celebrated in their community. So another opportunity for middle school is the intentionality behind trying to embrace diversity in all of its wonderfully rich and diverse ways, because we have boys 11, 12 and 13, and although our 17 and 18-year-old boys do an exceptional job of the way they conduct themselves, there's just a pressure that comes with a 6'2", you know, fully formed man standing next to a 11-year-old that's going, I'm still trying to work out what's happening with my voice. So, you know, we can help them develop an appreciation of your emotional self, your EQ, in a safe environment, with the hope that by the time they're 14 years of age, that's one of those foundation stones. And then I've only been here a short time, but I love bumping into the boys somewhere around year 10 and going, what happened to you? You and I spent a lot of time together in year 8, you know, for probably not all the right reasons. And we talked a lot about it, and they won't necessarily find the words, but it's like it all sort of syncs up. And then they do have that notion of self-management, and they do understand that they're going to have to commit to some fairly long evenings just to make sure that they're prepared for whatever the assessment is. So I'm just mindful that they don't always have to be the same. You know, helping young people prepare for success, and our role is only preparing them for success stepping into year 9, can be a different model to what preparing boys for success heading into post-secondary life is. And I suppose that's my piece, sort of saying the two don't have to be the same. We can agree to disagree, and middle school is like that middle child. You know, it's taking a very caring student-centered primary model with a view of getting them to subject specificity and excellence in different learning environments, but taking 3 years to do the transition. And mindful that we don't want to push primary school up too much further, and we don't want to push high school down too much further. And we've known for a long time, right, the learning environment for early learners, for early childhood centres, has been different. You know, we celebrate that. Primary school the same. Scotch College is just an awareness to go, early adolescence deserves its own learning environment, its own pedagogy, its own foci that can be different to the ones. They don't have. It doesn't mean one's right or wrong. Just at age and stage, we're focusing on this, and that's really important to me.
All right, so you'd probably summarise to say that showing that vulnerability as a teacher is one of the critical areas, and we also have to assess them in these ATLs, which now kind of moves us to parents, I guess, because as we assess them or explicitly teach them and assess these ATLs, they might get a 2 out of 4, and the parent will go, why has my son got 50% in this test? So how is the parent's understanding of ATLs, and is there anything, because this is an opportunity for you to explain what that might be, what is it, how do they understand it, and what do they need to know if they don't?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. And we can say education. If it was that easy, we would have done it. And I think some of it's you're a product of your own life experience. So you've come through your own primary, secondary experience. No doubt you want the best for your son. That's why you've put yourself in a position, through sacrifice and hard work and whatever else. We've got a wonderful parent community, all wanting to give their son the very best start in life, but there's a little bit lost in that. And so, on a day-to-day basis, I have it reaffirmed that we're on the right path, because I'll sit with families and increasingly they're able to articulate their own desire for their young person to grow in this space. And I've done this. Actually, I think I first did it. I was the head of a middle school in the Middle East, an IB World School, and we had lots of families that were joining us from Europe. Large number of families from Germany and a large number from France, and it was just the nature of business in the Middle East at that time. And families were there. They're all expatriated. They were largely going to head back to Europe. Their sons and daughters were going to go to university in Europe, and we understood all of the requirements around number of languages and how tough it was to get into tertiary institutions in Europe. So convincing them about this middle years program and the IB became part of my real job, and I was able to talk passionately about it because I believed in it. But it began really honouring the learner profile and saying to people, you are all here because of relative success in your area of expertise. I want you to think for a minute, you're about to welcome a host of new employees to your organisation. And, it's right to assume that they've got the right qualification. That's why they're sitting in the room. They've got an interest. You're going to interview them. And I would argue that the things that are going to stand out for you are these characteristics that are framed within the learner profile, but much more importantly in the approaches to learning. Then it was more learner profile for me. I suppose I was relatively new and stepping in, and we were talking broadly about that, but just of good character, like moral and ethically, globally well-balanced young people. Yes, knowledgeable, but good communicators and risk takers and problem solvers. But if you look in today's world, and I had a conversation this morning with a parent whose son really does need a learning environment a little different to what his parents had when they were at school. That's why we were chatting about it. But their focus, and mine, is to be successful in the 21st century. We still have to have a degree of knowledge retention. We have access to it like we've never had before. So I would think rather than knowledge, we want the higher order thinking skills of analysis and interpretation and responding, and what do you do with that information? But without a doubt, we want them to collaborate, to communicate, to be able to research, to manage themselves independently, maybe not even in the workplace, or maybe their colleague is in the other hemisphere. How do you do that? That's the part that businesses are going to need. They are the ATLs. There's no doubt about it. So to get back, how do we bring the parents along? Well, I think they've already positioned us as the educators of choice. They've done their homework. They committed to Scotch College when they signed the agreement. So we're in a beautiful position to be educating our families as well. And so I think that's what we do, through examples like this. And again, we've got to shift our own pedagogy. We're not going to welcome them into the memo hall on a Thursday night and sort of lecture to them for 45 minutes and think, that we've converted them, you've converted. It's just ongoing communication from all of us, our teachers, making sure our boys understand and are able to use the same language, making sure that when we're sharing feedback around tasks at school, that it's pretty front and centre.
I wonder, Brad, if there's an opportunity for parents in the middle school and kids in the middle school and staff to have like a parent-teacher type, a PTSI, that's completely around ATLs, where the parent could talk potentially about their own.
Or teachers just go, you just made me do more work.
Well, it's actually come up, Sam, because
they could reflect on their own workplace, what that looks like in their life, in their working life. The kid, the middle school boy could reflect how that looks in the classroom for him, what he's struggling with, the teacher, a conversation, instead of telling, here's how you're performing in maths. Maybe
it's kind of what STEM, like when I have PTSIs with STEM, that's what it is. And they're the most impressive conversations we have as in the PTSIs. But the interesting
thing, but you were right. So, I would hope that the ongoing sort of feedback that we provide to our families, task-specific rubrics and criterion-referenced assessment, and the access that they have to learning programs and their sons, learning platforms, whether it be that traditional workbook or through OneNote or Teams, we and our reporting has shifted a little bit to reflect that. Our reports now are very much, sort of a waypoint along the journey, and there shouldn't be any surprises because we've been very communicative with our families and they can come in. And so it really gives us the opportunity to look at those interactions in a different way. The need for a traditional, in our case too, they've been parent-teacher interviews at that transition point. The family will come in, meet with the teacher, talk about it, and some of them still want their son to sit outside so they can say, look, I don't know, how's he really doing, So to return to that, and some of our staff have come around and have gone, I think we really miss an opportunity. I sat recently with Brad Gill, our deputy head pastoral in the middle school, and Justin Shaw, who's heading up student leadership, and we've really looked at trying to grow some resilience in that space around student leadership and diversify what it looks like, get a nice breadth of leaders in our community. But we've had the boys had to write an application, and then they had to get support of a teacher, and the final part of that was they had an interview with us, and we only really had 3 questions, but a number of those boys interviewed for the position at the beginning of the year, and we have a big intake in the middle school, so we try and give the boys a chance. There'll be some that are ready and step into leadership in first semester of year 8, and then we go, oh, hang on a minute, we want to see some growth and we don't want them to miss the chance. So another group of boys have applied. So number one, a subset of these guys missed out first time, and here they are again. Great resilience, and to sit and having experienced both, the growth in those young men is exceptional in really unique ways that really honour who they are. So it was a great sort of moment of going, we're on the right path. But then out of that, I'm sitting there going, I'm listening to a family's son talk to me about how he's grown over the first 6 months of year 8, and Justin or Pina or who was ever sitting with me, we commented we wished we were recording it, because that would have been some of the best feedback that we could have shared with the family, because they were really honest and they were very astute and they were very able to talk about what's still a challenge to them, where they think they've got better, what their limitations are, how impressionable they are by their peer group. It was just very open, really, really
maybe that
good
would be
reflection.
a good thing, to have that reflection with a student and to be able to show if there is an issue.
Yeah.
You could show the parent.
There's no reason why you couldn't come into the studio.
Yeah.
Well, we actually wondered out of that, even, and as fantastic as this is with potentially, certainly for year 7 and year 8, well, definitely year 8, potentially year 7, maybe year 6, there's 480 odd students, but they're also nimble in this space. It's not so much about the quality of the video recording, it's the quality of the presentation, what they say. They've all got their devices. They could find a little space and take their own device, and there we go, and they navigate that beautifully. They would be able to upload it, and boom, there it is, and then that becomes part of their learning journey as well. And you do this a few times, and they can look back at their own self-reflections, and as we've got our reports that show progress over time, but I would argue that the kind of reflection and progress that they would show through watching a series of every 6 months there's another personal reflection, might be a powerful thing.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it would definitely help the parents too. So it's if I ask some curly questions now, what would be a good response from a parent in times of difficulty with ATLs, and what would be a bad response?
I think the bad one's probably easier, and it's like a lack of buy-in. I'm not interested in this communicative, collaborative stuff. How do we make sure his 7's across the board and on this ATAR pathway, and in that conversation, I'd say they're not mutually exclusive. Our argument is that, and I think it's the same, we talked on it, this student-centered approach. This isn't about making everybody feel good. It's about helping them grow. The notion of it being a linear progression is, we all appreciate, it doesn't exist. Middle school especially, there's rapid parts of acceleration and periods of plateau and maybe even regression as a young person responds to situation and circumstance and even just biology. So having people more aware of that. But yeah, lack of buy-in and being very driven and I try.
Do you have much success with buy-in when you explain it, or is it the relatively fixed bit of both?
Oh, look, I think, if it gets to the point where we're sitting like this, it's usually a fair way along. It's not me sending out a general message to everybody. They're always very civil, and I think people read the room really well and can sort of, tell you what you want to hear. Whether or not we're converting too many, but it's just another opportunity to say it's really important to us. And yep, absolutely, there'll be opportunity for your son to thrive and excel, and we will push them in appropriate ways, and the challenge and the rigour, all of that will be there. We just want you to be mindful too that we don't think we're doing you or your son a service if we allow him to continue in a way that doesn't respect the opinions of others, or it is a collaborative exercise. One of the accessible points at the moment is their ability to collaborate. So he might choose to go away and do an exceptional part, but he's not going to get level 7s across the board because one of the learning intentions is his ability to collaborate. That's sometimes frustrating in an IB sort of criterion referenced assessment model. But it shouldn't be a surprise,
Yeah, I have had kickback from parents on occasion, and luckily the way I've designed a lot of the assessments, say one of the ATLs is giving and receiving meaningful feedback. So what I'll do, they'll have it's like a little learning symposium. They're all talking, and I'm just kind of sitting back taking notes. And I take notes of who's disrupting, who's actively listening, and who's doing this. And then there'll be a parent. It's like, why did my son get a 1 for this ATL? And I have a list of, he was sitting there with his head on the desk while other people were talking, and he was rocking on his chair and he was asking silly questions, and I have that all listed, because it can sometimes come across a bit gruff in the initial one, but then after that, okay, yeah, that's actually what we see at home.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how often you can get to that particular point, and it's just shifting the mindset. They're so driven around what perhaps it's well intended and might be a little bit misguided in the focus, but when you get there, and that's what if it gets to a point, whether it's about ATLs or assessment criteria or our approach to something, it's very often for me, I'll sit with a family and say, do you trust in our intent? And a family will go, what do you mean? Well, fundamentally, have we in any way, sort of severed your trust in us? And they'll be ridiculous. And I'll go, well, then we're okay. This is salvageable. We've now got a communication part that we're working on, and so the accountability of the teacher is to provide you with meaningful feedback. We can give you what you want to hear. That's very easy to do, but our staff are professionals and are trying to honour that commitment they've made to you. So they're not doing it to be combative. They're doing it to give you a true picture of what we're seeing in the learning environment so that we can change it. It's not going to define them over time. But it does take those conversations, and like you've referenced, Steve, you've experienced it yourself. So
yeah, we all do.
Yeah. And I think the risk of that is you want to avoid that. So you can perhaps lose some of your objectivity with a degree of self-preservation in mind. And so we've got to be mindful to our families that they've got to trust in the intent of the teacher.
Yeah, I think overwhelmingly they are as well. There's only very few occasions where they haven't been supported.
And I think really appreciate
how well you know the student.
Exactly, and willingness to say he's not doing so well in this area, and you need to know that.
Yeah.
I think largely, 99% of the time, parents know that there's challenges going on as well, don't they? And they really want the best for their son and appreciate you being honest with them.
Look, and we have such a large intake of new students that arrive in the middle school. Obviously, all of our year 6s are new to the middle school environment, so new to the MYP. Even our 75 odd boys who'll come up from year 5 are moving into physically a new building with new expectations and new teachers. So it's massive onboarding, and then that cohort will graduate just as 100 into year 7, and then we'll have 175. So almost double in size again. So there's lots of new in our community, and I think sometimes we can forget living at how fast-paced that is, and so there's lots of push-pull and lots of want for young people to have good experiences early on. So everybody's sort of hanging on tight to try and make the very best of all of this. And I think maybe some of the answers in there is to just slow it down a little bit, and that's on us. That is absolutely on us, and find those ways of having a more personal relationship than sort of facts and figures on pieces of paper or in electrons and sending it backwards and forwards. Just sort of going, if it doesn't feel Scotch, it's probably not. So let's have a conversation. And I know that's when our staff are at their best. At that point, sometimes regrettable that it might get to that point, but I have been, and I was welcomed into this sort of expectation in the middle school, the ability for a teacher to find time to pick up the phone and to make a call, and to know that after that call is finished, any of that anxiety, largely coming from outside in, is diminished, and just reaffirms a family's commitment to the college. It might be new to them. Their relationships and experiences in learning environments outside of the college have framed them in a certain way. So you're coming in, and I think it's a bit of a reflection, societal reflection at the moment too. I watch. I've got that age, Sam. I'm officially the old man, and I look at just how people interact in every day-to-day life, and there's real confrontation around that, and harshness, and a sense that you have to behave in a certain way to advocate your point or to get the kind of service that you're hoping for. And I think it's just a really poor reflection for our young people.
All right. Well, there's no doubt, Brad, that you're a level 4 communicator. Thank you for absolute leader in that field. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we get into a few little fun questions? Yeah,
look, I think as I try and reflect and take this opportunity in its entirety is, a lot of what we chatted about are exciting opportunities for us in school, but it may present itself as being, gosh, what a challenging workplace. The only reason I get to consider all of the stuff that we're talking about is actually what was probably the most appealing thing about coming to the college. It's got a leadership model which empowers the sub-schools to really define and challenge and redevelop. So I'm really excited about that. And when we do talk about some of our challenges, they take up a fraction of our day in everything else going so unbelievably well. I have 480 boys that come in and out of the school every day and experience a breadth of opportunity that I would have only ever wished for as a student my age. And how many emails and phone calls do I get from our parents? Relatively few. And when they do get to me, they're appropriate questions and concerns, and they largely relate around, for me, if it doesn't feel like Scotch, it's probably not, and you need to get in touch with me. So, I spend, when I am engaging with parents, it's not always, out of a circumstance that we would want, but I feel grateful that they are comfortable getting in touch with us. And as I said before, when I talk about, do you still trust in our intent? Absolutely. So they're really just presenting opportunities for us to improve and to get better. And so a lot of what we've talked about today is, aspirationally, optimistically, opportunities for us to improve and to get better. And I would like to think, that we can do that in a way that has us as a bit of a thought leader. We've got the right people that are excited about education. They're continuing their own journey. They're at the forefront of ideas and initiatives. They're passionate about their area of expertise. And if we can just get some of the bureaucracy out of the way, amazing things can happen. I think
I'm with you there. The less bureaucracy, the better. Sam, anything else before you want to pepper in?
No, that's great. So that's sort of ultimately finishing up there a little bit with your vision of where you want this middle school to go. As you say, it's an amazing school. So many great things going on, and it's exciting to hear that vision, because I think we're all on the same page there. All right, now we get to the really light-hearted fun bit, Brad. You're gonna have to cut that.
I'm not cutting it. Staying in there.
All right, so we've got a few quick-fire questions for you. The first is, if you could recommend a book or books on education or anything else, what would they be?
I've got a growing stack of books on my desk, but they really just tend to be like for show at the moment, unfortunately. I've sort of thumbed through a few of them at different parts and pieces. So where am I spending my time at the moment? I've actually gone back to a book I read some time ago. Have you heard of a book called Last Child in the Woods?
No.
I don't know, and I think that's me getting to that old over the hill sort of guy, and it's a little bit about, written sometime before technology got out of control. I can't remember who the author is at the moment, but about especially in the community that we're in now, and not to stereotype too much, but about young boys making connections with what I might have experienced a much more of an adolescent upbringing, about actually being out in nature and being sure-footed and present and just being, living, breathing, right here, right now, without the distractions and too much forward thinking, and really engaging with nature is one that I've going through and highlighting, just because I want to pull some stuff out to share with our community. Obviously, we've been fairly buried in, the development of social and emotional work for boys. So I actually listened to the Resilience Project by Hugh Van.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. We saw that in the book in the airport
Yeah,
yesterday.
and so it's a really easy read, and at the moment I'm doing things that have not quite processed. I don't think you can actually go and pick something up off the shelf and bring it in. And we're in conversations. A great local, not really an author, but a great local presenter. Actually, he's an old Scotch collegian, Mike Dyson, has a business called Good Blokes, and so a lot of what he's passing my way is taking up a little bit of time. That's really interesting. There's a study out of QUT done a few years ago, commissioned work around what is called the Man Box, and that paper's free to download off of Queensland University of Technology. So if you're a parent of any age male student, a parent of a son, it's a really easy read, but it's got some really great. It's a survey done from 18 to 28-year-old young men, and about what they wished the school experience was versus what it actually was. So
that'd be interesting.
I'm having a bit of a look at that at the moment. Not sure I'd overtly recommend any of them as sort of number one on your readers list, Sam. Wish I had given you a head up.
That's great.
I would have printed them out and had them all down here.
No, that's great. Okay, what about if you're on a deserted island and you could have one album?
It's got to be Springsteen for starters. That's tough. I'll take The River because it's a double album.
It's going to be a long time there on that island.
Yeah. I actually, Sam, I had a long. So the Year 10 expedition, one of these amazing opportunities these young boys get to experience here, and I drove down from Exmouth, and in my very best Spotify album, I actually downloaded every Springsteen album in order, and I travelled down on my own. And I listened to them one track after the other, and I got through up to some of the not so great works like Tunnel of Love. I think I'm probably up to, or something like that. So that's my love affair with Mr. Springsteen.
Very good. Okay, what about a habit that you have developed over the last 5 years that's been particularly beneficial to you?
Oh God, I've got 100 that are not beneficial. I was queued up.
What should you have done in the last 5 years then?
Yeah, eaten less, run more. I suppose what I hope...
Oh yeah, what habit would you like to return to if you could maybe, or a habit that you've developed?
not fall off that exercise and not at a competitive sort of combative weekend thing, but just this notion that regular good sweat-inducing physical exercise was still a joy of my day, not an absolute, sort of nightmare. That would have been a good habit to continue. At some point, your metabolism changes, and you can't just eat and drink what you might like. Nobody told me. So there you go. That might be the only pearl of wisdom today.
All right.
No, there were plenty of pearls of wisdom. Thanks for coming in, Brad. That was really insightful, and good luck with the rest of it.
You're very kind. Hopefully you'll be there right alongside me
Will
for this next short to mid-term chapter, gentlemen. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Brad.